Clean this up. Now Victoria Lang's voice cut across the marble lobby like a whip. Her manicured hand flicked toward the dark splash of coffee spreading over the polished floor. The gathered staff chuckled nervously, eyes darting between the furious CEO and the woman in a faded blue janitorial uniform. Elena Torres bent down with her mop, her back aching, her cheeks burning, but her voice, quiet and steady, broke through the hush. Funny. The last time someone ordered me to clean up their mess, they ended up losing their chair at the table. The guest froze. His espresso cup hovered in midair as recognition dawned in his eyes. The janitor? No, he knew her. He had studied under her. If you're tired of watching the powerful humiliate the people who hold everything together, you'll want to stick around. This isn't just another workplace story. It's the moment an underdog turns the tables. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss the full reversal that's coming. Elena stood calmly, her mop poised. The laughter died down. For a heartbeat, the air shifted. The weight of her words unsettled even the most polished executive in the lobby. She wasn't supposed to speak. Not here, not in this role. But she did. And in that simple act, she reminded herself that she was still Elena Torres, once a strategist who could dismantle billion-dollar empires with a spreadsheet and a phone call. The uniform didn't erase her mind, her instincts, or her will. It only masked them. Her son Lucas needed the paycheck, the insurance, the routine stability this lowly job afforded. And so, she kept her head down, traded boardroom strategy sessions for late-night shifts with bleach and buckets. She could live with humiliation. She could live with invisible dignity. But she couldn't live with the hospital bills piling higher than the skyline she cleaned. Victoria Lang, on the other hand, lived for the performance of power. Everything about her screamed superiority. The silk scarf knotted at her throat, the click of her Louboutin heels, the way she weaponized silence until others folded. She didn't just run the company, she performed it. And today, her chosen stage was Elena's back, bent over spilled coffee. Daniel Reed's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to stop this petty cruelty. But his role was delicate. He was here as a potential investor, a man weighing whether to move millions into Victoria's empire. Yet in the moment he recognized Elena, the balance shifted. Memories rushed back, her voice guiding him through late-night strategy marathons. Her insight dismantling competitors he thought unbeatable. She had been a mentor, a leader, a force. Now she was holding a mop. Victoria smirked. "That's all you're good for, isn't it?" The staff murmured. Some averted their eyes. Some smirked in unison with their boss. Elena kept her head lowered, her grip tightening on the mop handle, the plastic biting into her palm. But inside, she cataloged every detail. The way the investor's eyes narrowed, the tremor in Victoria's voice that betrayed nerves she thought hidden. The tables weren't turned yet, but they would be. Where are you watching from? Elena's story isn't bound by this lobby or this city. It echoes in every workplace where someone is underestimated, dismissed, or stepped on. And as you'll see, Victoria Lang chose the wrong woman to humiliate. Because Elena wasn't just going to clean the coffee, she was going to clean house. Elena's mop slid across the marble floor, slow and deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world. Every swipe erased a trace of coffee. But the tension left behind was impossible to mop away. Victoria Lang's smirk lingered, her eyes darting toward Daniel Reed, who hadn't moved. The guest's silence unsettled her, more than the janitor's quiet defiance. Daniel finally set his cup down on the table beside him, his gaze fixed on Elena. She felt it, like a weight pressing between her shoulder blades. She didn't look up, didn't give away anything more than she had already allowed. Let him wonder. Let him remember. Are we ready to proceed? Victoria's tone snapped back into command, her voice bouncing against the high ceilings. She turned to her assistant, who scurried forward with a tablet. The staff moved as if on invisible strings, eager to shift focus away from the uncomfortable moment. Elena wrung the mop and slid it back into the bucket. Her hands were red from years of bleach, her knuckles raw, but the strength beneath them hadn't faded. She knew she had let slip too much in her earlier comment, but part of her didn't regret it. Sometimes a controlled leak was necessary to shake the walls before a storm. Victoria glanced down at her. One eyebrow arched. Make sure this floor shines. We're entertaining serious money today. Not that you'd know anything about that. Elena stood upright, meeting her eyes for the first time. Calm, steady. You'd be surprised what I know. It was subtle, just enough to draw a flicker of uncertainty across Victoria's polished face. But then she turned sharply, dismissing Elena like dust on her designer sleeve. Daniel's memory worked overtime. He could see it clearly. The old glass conference room, the rain beating against the windows, Elena leaning over charts while he fumbled through numbers. Her clarity had guided him, taught him to cut through noise and find the signal. She was brilliant, too brilliant to be here. The meeting resumed in the atrium's glass-walled lounge. Executives gathered, tablets glowing with graphs and projections. Investors leaned back in leather chairs, murmuring in low tones. Elena retreated to the periphery, her cart rolling softly against the tiles. But she didn't just vanish. She observed. Her eyes swept the screens as she polished a nearby table. Numbers, ratios, forecasts. She knew the language. Instantly. It was the same dialect she once lived and breathed. And she spotted the flaw within minutes. A hole in Victoria's projections, big enough to swallow the deal. Victoria didn't see it. Or perhaps she ignored it, gambling that no one else would notice. But Daniel's eyes narrowed at the same slide, his doubt plain. He shifted in his seat, fingers tapping the armrest, glancing again toward Elena. She lowered her gaze, pretending to focus on her work. But inside, her pulse quickened. The trap was already forming. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about survival. For her son, for herself, for every invisible worker who lived under the heel of power like Victoria's. Projections remain strong, Victoria declared, gesturing to the glowing chart. Our third-quarter growth puts us ahead of every competitor in the sector. Daniel leaned forward. And the debt exposure in your European branch? How do you plan to manage the risk if the currency shifts against you? A flicker of irritation crossed Victoria's features. Our models account for volatility. Next question. But Daniel didn't sit back. His eyes lingered on Elena, who was wiping the same table twice. He remembered her teaching him that very phrase. Exposure, volatility, risk. Words he hadn't known until she drilled them into him. She could almost hear him thinking, "Why aren't you speaking? Why are you silent?" Elena pressed her cloth into the wood, grounding herself. This wasn't the time. Not yet. A revelation without timing was wasted, and timing was her specialty. Still, the tremor in Victoria's performance thrilled her. The crack had formed. It was only a matter of widening it. Victoria adjusted her scarf, her polished tone turning sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, the rest of our forecast is airtight. I assure you, this company is led by people who know exactly what they're doing. Her eyes flicked to Elena, dismissive, cruel, even down to keeping the floors spotless. Laughter scattered around the room, forced and brittle. Elena didn't flinch. She steadied her cart, rolled it forward, and let her silence hold more power than words. She knew who she was, and soon they would know too. Daniel leaned back at last, though unease tightened his jaw. He couldn't reconcile the image. The mentor who once guided him, now forced into servitude, dismissed by the very type of arrogance she once dismantled with ease. Something wasn't right, and if he was going to commit millions, he needed answers. For Elena, the game had only begun. She wheeled her cart to the side, her reflection catching in the glass walls. Blue uniform, tired eyes, a mop bucket half full of gray water. But beneath it all, the strategist waited. The next move wasn't Victoria's to make. It was hers. The meeting dissolved into clusters of low conversation, executives gathering like satellites around Victoria Lang. She basked in their attention, her laugh sharp as crystal. Elena parked her cart near the edge of the room, pretending to arrange her rags. But her eyes flicked once more to the glowing screen. The gap in the numbers wasn't just a flaw. It was a trap waiting to spring. She could see the risks spread like ink through paper. If Daniel asked one more question, if any investor pressed harder, the entire pitch could crumble. And Victoria didn't even notice. Victoria raised her glass of water with a graceful hand. You see, this is why we're untouchable. Competitors are scrambling, while we're already 2 steps ahead. Elena's jaw tightened. 2 steps ahead? The woman hadn't been 2 steps ahead a day in her life. She'd simply inherited momentum built by others and pretended it was her own brilliance. Elena knew. She had lived in that world, once upon a time. She had watched weaker leaders survive on appearances while real strategists were the ones who held companies together. From her corner, she heard 2 assistants whispering as they carried in more files. Lang's glossing over the liabilities again, one muttered. The other shot him a warning look, but the words reached Elena anyway. Confirmation. She wasn't imagining it. The foundation was shaky. Daniel stood near the far window, his profile stiff. He tapped his phone once, as if taking notes, but his eyes strayed again toward Elena. She pretended not to notice, though her pulse hammered against her ribs. The recognition in his face was growing sharper by the minute. Victoria swept forward, placing a manicured hand on his arm. Daniel, I'd love to show you the executive floor next. It'll give you a sense of how we operate from the top down. He smiled politely, but didn't move. In a moment. I'd like to hear more about your strategy for handling the debt risk. The air stiffened. A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's painted smile didn't falter, but her grip on Daniel's arm tightened. Our models are sound, she said coolly. Any volatility is temporary noise. We think big picture here, Daniel. Always have Elena bent over her bucket, her cloth dripping into the gray water. She remembered those exact words. Big picture. Noise. Phrases Victoria had stolen from pitch decks Elena once built, stripped of the substance that gave them weight. It was like watching a puppet perform with stolen strings. Noise? Daniel echoed. He tilted his head. Strange. Because when I was taught to recognize volatility patterns, I was told the noise often disguises the first tremor of a collapse. Victoria blinked, caught off guard. Elena almost smiled. Those were her words. She had said them years ago, across a long night of data and coffee when Daniel was still learning. She had drilled them into him until he could recognize risk without hesitation. And now he was quoting her, throwing her own wisdom against the very person who dismissed her as invisible. Victoria's smile grew brittle. We can continue this conversation in the boardroom. I assure you, our position is strong. But Daniel's gaze had already shifted, sliding past her to Elena. The janitor lowered her head quickly, but it was too late. The look in his eyes told her he was certain now. He knew. She pushed her cart toward the hallway, letting the distance swallow the tension. She had no intention of revealing herself yet, not on Victoria's terms. Timing mattered, and this wasn't the strike. But she felt the charge building, a coil of power that could no longer stay hidden forever. Out in the corridor, the hum of the building swallowed her. Elevators dinged, heels clattered, voices murmured about deadlines and deals. She moved quietly, her cart squeaking on the polished floor. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow waiting for the moment the storm would break. Behind her, Victoria guided Daniel and the investors toward the boardroom. Elena caught fragments of words. Growth, legacy, unmatched stability. The hollow theater of control. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She slipped it out, shielding the screen with her hand. A message from Lucas's school. His fever had spiked again. They needed her to pick him up early. Her throat tightened. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when the balance was tipping. Not when she was this close to exposing the truth. But Lucas was everything. Every mop stroke, every late night, every humiliation. She had endured it all for him. She typed quickly, arranging for her neighbor to collect him until she finished her shift. Relief was fragile, but it held her steady. She would see him soon. And if she played her cards right today, maybe, just maybe, this job wouldn't have to be her forever. She returned to the atrium, just as Victoria launched into another monologue about innovation. Elena's gaze lingered on Daniel, who no longer looked impressed. His jaw was set, his questions sharper. And each time his eyes flicked her way, it was like a tether pulling the past into the present. Elena gripped the handle of her cart, her decision crystallizing. If Victoria wanted to parade her as invisible, Elena would bide her time. She didn't need to announce herself yet. The truth had a way of surfacing on its own. And when it did, it wouldn't just be a reveal. It would be a reckoning. The boardroom was a stage dressed in glass and steel. The skyline stretched out behind Victoria Lang like a crown she believed she'd earned. Executives lined the polished table, their suits crisp, their smiles rehearsed. Elena slipped in quietly with her cart, unnoticed except as part of the background. That was fine. She had spent years learning how the background could hold the most power. Victoria stood at the head of the table, every inch the queen she imagined herself to be. "This company is a fortress," she declared, her voice filling the sleek chamber. "And like any fortress, it is impenetrable." Elena rolled her cart along the edge, her eyes flicking to the screens mounted on the walls. Charts glowed in neon precision, their lines angled upward with aggressive optimism. But she saw it instantly, the miscalculation widening like a crack in a dam. If the investors pushed, if Daniel pressed harder, the illusion could collapse in real time. Her pulse steadied. The timing was building. Victoria gestured toward the glowing slides. "We've weathered volatility before. With my leadership, we've always come out stronger." Elena's mop squeaked faintly on the floor, the sound piercing through the polished performance. For a moment, heads turned, irritation flickering across executive faces. Elena lowered her gaze and slowed her movement. But the interruption had already frayed the edges of Victoria's control. Daniel leaned forward, his fingers laced. "You talk about leadership. But when I look at these numbers, I see a pattern, a repeat of the same blind spot." The room went still. Even the hum of the projector seemed to hush. Victoria's smile froze. "Blind spot? Our models are flawless." Daniel tilted his head, studying her. "Strange. Because I learned from someone far sharper than most executives how to recognize cracks exactly like this." His gaze flicked, unmasked. toward Elena. Heat rose to her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, but the look lingered long enough to ripple through the room. Eyes followed his line of sight to the janitor polishing the floor. Then they darted back to him, confusion sparking like static. Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Daniel, you're giving far too much credit to shadows. Our fortress is solid." Elena dipped her mop again, steadying her hands. Not yet. She wouldn't step forward prematurely, but Daniel's words had shifted the atmosphere. The possibility was out in the open now, hanging in the silence, daring anyone to question it. Victoria pushed on. "If there are no further doubts, I suggest we move to signing." But doubt had already taken root. Executives shuffled their notes. Investors exchanged glances. And Daniel didn't budge. He tapped his pen against the table. Once. Twice. "Signing a deal without addressing risk is reckless. I was taught never to ignore the noise beneath the numbers." Elena felt the echo, like a chord struck deep in her chest. Those were her exact words. Years ago, in a dim-lit office where she once ruled with clarity instead of a mop. Hearing them spoken aloud here, in Victoria's boardroom, was both vindication and a spark of danger. Victoria's gaze hardened. "I assure you, our position is stronger than you realize." She swept her eyes toward Elena, as though daring her to contradict the performance. A silent dismissal, sharp as a blade. "Stay in your place." Elena wrung the mop, her fingers white against the handle. She thought of Lucas, of his fever last night, of the pills she rationed to make them stretch, of the quiet nights where she told him stories of heroes who never bowed to arrogance. She swallowed the heat in her throat. Dignity wasn't silence. Dignity was waiting until the strike mattered most. Daniel shifted back, but his eyes stayed on her. She could feel the question burning there. "Why are you still silent?" Because silence, wielded right, was strategy. And strategy had always been her weapon. A tray clattered near the doorway as an assistant rushed in, spilling a folder of reports. Papers scattered across the polished floor. Elena instinctively moved forward, kneeling to help gather them before the assistant's shaking hands made a scene. As she slid one sheet into the pile, her eyes caught the numbers, internal forecasts, unpolished, unedited. And there it was, proof. The hole was wider than anyone realized. She stacked the papers silently, slipping the sheet back into the pile. But her heartbeat pounded with certainty. She didn't need to imagine the collapse anymore. She had seen it with her own eyes. When she rose, Victoria was watching her. Suspicion sharpened her gaze, but she said nothing. Not yet. Elena rolled her cart back to the corner, her movements unhurried, her face calm. Inside, the strategist in her was already mapping the lines of attack. Timing, evidence, exposure, one move at a time. The fortress Victoria bragged about was already cracking. And when it finally broke, everyone in this glass tower would see who had held the real power all along. The boardroom air had turned heavy, the kind of stillness that followed thunder when everyone waited to see if the storm would strike again. Elena wheeled her cart slowly toward the far wall, her reflection stretched in the glass like a double life staring back at her. Janitor on the outside, strategist beneath the surface. Victoria Lang smoothed her scarf and forced a smile. "Let's not get lost in overanalyzing. The strength of this company speaks for itself." She tapped the stack of glossy reports with a manicured finger. "The numbers are here. Solid." Reliable Elena's lips pressed into a line. She had just seen the opposite, buried in the scattered forecast sheet she'd helped collect. That document screamed weakness. Yet here Victoria was, parading the illusion of power as though volume could drown out truth. Daniel Reed's expression hardened. He leaned back in his chair, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning not just Victoria, but the faces of her executives. Their unease betrayed them. He had seen enough boardrooms to know when people were papering over cracks. Elena bent to adjust the mop in her bucket. As she did, something small shifted in her pocket. She slipped her hand inside and brushed her fingers against it. A pen. Not just any pen. Her old Mont Blanc, scratched from years of use. The one Lucas had found in a drawer and insisted she carry because it was lucky. The pen was more than metal and ink. It was the last remnant of the world she had once commanded. The tool she had used to sign deals, mark contracts, and write the words that had shifted millions. She had tucked it away out of habit, never thinking today it would resurface. Now, its weight reminded her she wasn't invisible. She was biding her time. Victoria droned on about market share, her voice rising theatrically. When you invest here, you invest in certainty. Daniel tilted his head. Certainty can be dangerous, especially when it blinds leadership to the volatility beneath. His words were deliberate, each one aimed like a dart. Murmurs rippled across the table. Executives shifted in their chairs. For a moment, Victoria's jaw tightened. Then she shot a glare toward Elena, who stood at the wall, still holding her cart handle. The look carried venom. Stay silent. Know your place. But Daniel's gaze followed too, softer, weighted with recognition. His eyes flicked to her pocket as if he had seen the gleam of the Mont Blanc. And in that instant, his face changed. He remembered. That pen had signed the deal that once saved his career. A jolt of electricity raced through Elena. This was it. The first thread tugged loose. Her identity wasn't out yet, but the symbolic object had spoken louder than words. Victoria raised her glass again, her voice sharp. Our track record speaks volumes. Unlike competitors, we don't stumble when challenged. The irony stung. Elena's hand curled tighter around the pen in her pocket. Her son's voice echoed in her mind, his childlike certainty. Mom, lucky things remind you you're stronger than they think. She breathed deeply, letting the weight steady her. Daniel tapped his pen against the table. Track records are valuable, he said slowly, but only when they're backed by substance. I once worked under someone who taught me that appearances can be the deadliest trap in business. He let the sentence hang, his eyes never leaving Elena's. Confusion flickered across the executives' faces. They whispered among themselves, glancing from Daniel to Victoria to the janitor by the wall. Victoria's laugh rang false. We don't live in the past here. We live in the future. I suggest we move to close this discussion. But the tension refused to dissipate. It lingered, fed by Daniel's insistence and Elena's silent presence. Elena shifted her cart toward the doorway, the mop bucket squeaking faintly. She knew what she was doing, drawing the room's attention to her exit, reminding them that she was still there, still watching. Her hand brushed the Mont Blanc again. She imagined signing her name across the boardroom table, imagined the shock when the mask fell. Not yet, but soon. As she stepped out into the hallway, the echoes of Victoria's voice followed, brittle and loud. Elena's shoulders straightened. The pen was a promise. Her moment was coming. And when it did, the fortress Victoria bragged about wouldn't just crack. It would collapse, signed, and sealed by the very woman she had humiliated. Elena paused in the hallway. The murmur of the boardroom muffled behind the glass doors. Her cart rattled faintly as she steadied it. But her thoughts were already racing. The pen in her pocket felt like a live ember, a reminder of everything she had been and everything she could still be. Inside, Victoria Lang continued her performance. her voice carrying through the wall with exaggerated confidence. Elena knew that tone, an overreach designed to smother doubt. But doubt wasn't gone. She had seen it in Daniel Reed's eyes, in the shifting body language of the executives, in the restless way the investors had glanced at their notes. The veneer was thinning. Elena leaned against the cool glass wall. A sudden sound startled her. Two junior staffers walking briskly down the corridor, whispering too loudly. "I don't know how she gets away with it," one said, clutching a stack of binders. "Lang talks a big game," the other muttered, "but everyone knows Torres used to be the real strategist." Elena's breath caught. She froze in place, pressing herself closer to the wall. Her name, her real name, spoken in the open. The staffers hurried past, their voices fading as they disappeared around the corner. But the echo of their words lingered. Everyone knows Torres used to be the real strategist. Her pulse hammered. That was it. The first leak. Reputation had a way of seeping through cracks, no matter how carefully you buried it. Someone remembered, maybe more than someone. And now, the whisper was loose in the hallways of the very building where Victoria paraded her dominance. Elena pushed her cart forward, the squeak of its wheels grounding her. She returned to the service corridor that looped back to the boardroom entrance. As she moved, fragments of conversation followed her. Executives whispering, assistants rushing with papers, the hum of a company beginning to sense instability. When she re-entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was different. The chatter was subdued, investors exchanging looks, Daniel's sharp eyes fixed firmly on Victoria. Elena slipped back into her corner, silent, but present. Victoria gestured wildly at the projections on the wall. "This company has grown under my command, not in spite of it. I have led with precision, decisiveness, and vision. That's why you can trust me with your investment." Elena almost laughed. Precision, vision, the very things Victoria had once ridiculed in her when they were colleagues, dismissing them as unnecessary details. Now she wore them like ill-fitting clothes. Daniel leaned forward again. Vision is only as strong as the strategist behind it. His words were deliberate, heavy. Then, almost too casually, he added, "I once had the privilege of learning under someone who could see cracks no one else noticed." All eyes turned to him. His gaze, however, slid unmistakably toward the corner where Elena stood with her. "Mop!" A murmur swept the room. The whisper from the corridor had already started to circulate, an undercurrent of rumor linking the janitor to a name that once commanded respect. Victoria's jaw stiffened. "Daniel, you're wasting time with ghosts. We're here to talk about the present, not dredge up the past." But her voice carried an edge of panic now, a sharpness that betrayed her polished mask. Elena dipped her mop in the bucket, the faint splash filling the silence. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the attention. But inside, a storm brewed. Her cover wasn't holding as tightly as before. She hadn't spoken, yet her name was back in circulation. Her presence was no longer invisible. Victoria's eyes narrowed at her, venomous and suspicious. The unspoken challenge hung between them. "Say one word, and I'll crush you." Elena steadied herself. Not yet. Strategy demanded patience. Exposure without precision would only create chaos. She needed the right moment, the undeniable strike. Still, she could feel it, the tide beginning to shift. Her past wasn't buried. It was whispering through the halls, seeping into conversations, stirring doubt in the investors Victoria so desperately needed to impress. Daniel leaned back, his voice deceptively calm. "If there are ghosts here, they seem to be teaching lessons that still matter." The tension was palpable. Every executive holding their breath, waiting for Victoria to reassert control. She forced a smile. brittle as glass. Let's not indulge distractions. We'll proceed to contracts. But as she spoke, Elena caught the sideways glances of two executives, their eyes flicking to her and then away. Recognition, rumor, curiosity. The ripple was spreading. Elena pressed the mop firmly against the floor, her grip tightening. She didn't need to force the reveal. The cracks in Victoria's fortress were widening on their own. And when the walls finally gave way, Elena would be standing right here, ready to show everyone that the woman with the mop had always been the sharpest mind in the room. Elena pushed the mop back into the bucket, the faint splash echoing louder than it should have in the glass and steel boardroom. Every pair of eyes felt closer now, their curiosity no longer hidden. She didn't need to look up to know that whispers about her name, Torres, were already threading through the room like smoke. Victoria Lang tapped the table with her manicured nails, the sharp clicks puncturing the silence. "We're wasting valuable time," she snapped, her gaze sweeping the investors before landing coldly on Elena. "This presentation is about the future, not distractions." Daniel Reed leaned forward, unbothered by her attempt to steer the moment. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Sometimes the future depends on whether we've learned from the right teachers in the past." He let the words linger, then glanced again toward Elena. The shift in the room was undeniable. Executives exchanged uneasy looks, some recalling the rumors, others trying to piece together why an investor kept focusing on a janitor. Elena forced her grip to loosen on the mop handle. Her knuckles had gone white, but her expression remained unreadable. Inside, though, her pulse quickened. She hadn't chosen this timing, yet it was happening. Her reputation was leaking into the open without her lifting a finger. Strategy was sometimes about letting the board move itself. Victoria's jaw tightened. She rose from her chair, her silk scarf brushing against the gleaming mahogany. "Enough," she declared. "We'll move forward to signing the contracts." Investors who understand strength know when to stop entertaining distractions. But her voice carried a thread of desperation now, too brittle for a woman who prided herself on control. Daniel didn't stand. He leaned back, studying her like a chess player, watching an opponent stumble into checkmate. "Contracts are only strong when the foundation is stable. What I'm seeing here," he gestured toward the glowing slides, "doesn't feel stable." Murmurs rippled through the investors. A few heads nodded slightly, emboldened by Daniel's refusal to be rushed. Elena dipped the mop again, letting the sound fill the tension. She remembered nights spent exactly like this, sitting in rooms with men who thought themselves invincible until she dismantled them with a single observation. The mop in her hand might be wood and rag now, but in her mind, it was the same tool as before. A pointer, a marker, a reminder of where the weakness lay. Victoria's glare snapped back to her. "You!" she spat, the word sharper than intended. "If you're done distracting, clean the hallway. We don't need interruptions in here." The humiliation was meant to reassert dominance, but the outburst only deepened the fracture. Executives stiffened, and Daniel's brow lifted as if to say, "She's cracking under pressure." Elena lifted her chin slightly, calm, unflinching. "Of course, Miss Lang." Her voice carried no resentment, only quiet steadiness. But her words were chosen, a blade wrapped in silk. She used the title deliberately, distancing herself, refusing to play into the personal attack. She pushed her cart toward the door, her reflection passing over the polished glass wall. Behind her, the boardroom buzzed with a tension Victoria couldn't smooth. Out in the corridor, Elena paused. She pressed a hand against her pocket where the Mont Blanc pen rested, the weight grounding her. The whispers of her name, the slip of recognition in Daniel's gaze. These weren't accidents. The truth was moving forward with or without her. A voice broke her thoughts. One of the younger executives, a woman with wary eyes, slipped into the hallway, pretending to check her phone. She hesitated before speaking. I thought it was you, she murmured. Torres, you trained half the analysts in this building before Lang pushed you out. Why are you? She glanced at the mop bucket, words faltering. Elena met her eyes steady. Life doesn't always follow the path you expect. She left it at that. No explanation offered, no confession. But the message landed. The executive's throat bobbed as she swallowed, guilt flickering across her face. Then she turned quickly back into the boardroom, shaken. Elena exhaled slowly. Reputation. It traveled faster than any contract, any spreadsheet, any projection. And right now, it was traveling through that boardroom, dismantling Victoria's fortress, brick by brick. She wheeled her cart further down the hall, but every sound from the room carried after her. The rise of Daniel's voice, the defensive edge in Victoria's. The storm wasn't hers to start anymore. It was already underway. Still, she knew the real strike hadn't yet come. Timing was everything, and she was patient. When she returned, the boardroom would no longer see her as just a janitor. They would see her as the strategist who had once shaped empires, and the woman who could do it again. Elena wheeled her cart further down the corridor, her pace steady, but her mind burning with calculation. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every flicker of Daniel's eyes toward her told her the fortress was beginning to collapse. She didn't have to push. It was unraveling itself. But if she wanted to secure something lasting for Lucas, she needed more than cracks. She needed the collapse to be undeniable, inescapable, and public. She paused by a tall window overlooking the city. Skyscrapers glowed in the late afternoon light, monuments to power and pride. Once, her office had been up there, high above the streets, where decisions shaped markets and lives. Now she stood here in a janitor's uniform, a mop her shield, watching the towers from below. The contrast bit into her chest, but it didn't break her. If anything, it reminded her why patience mattered. Inside the boardroom, Victoria Lang's voice rose sharply, straining to maintain control. Elena leaned her mop against the wall and listened, her head tilted just enough to catch the words through the open crack of the door. This company has never been in a stronger position, Victoria declared, brittle pride woven through every syllable. Doubt is a luxury for those who don't carry responsibility. Daniel's voice followed, low but steady. Responsibility doesn't excuse blindness. Numbers don't care about pride, Victoria. They care about precision. The words cut through the air. Elena could almost see Victoria's expression, the frozen smile, the tightening jaw. That was the same lesson Elena had drilled into Daniel years ago. Precision over ego, data over pride. And now, he was hurling it back at a woman who had humiliated her only minutes earlier. Elena's hand brushed her pocket, feeling the weight of the Mont Blanc pen again. The object was no longer just symbolic. It was becoming a beacon. Daniel had seen it, remembered it, connected it to her. And now, the others were beginning to connect the dots too. She exhaled slowly, then straightened. Timing wasn't just about waiting, it was about preparing. If the reveal came, she had to be ready to wield it. She stepped back into the boardroom quietly. The tension was thicker now, the investors leaning forward, the executives whispering behind clipped hands. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her immediately, a spark of recognition softening into certainty. Victoria noticed. Her gaze snapped toward Elena, sharp as glass. "Why are you still here?" she demanded. "I told you to handle the hallway." Elena paused, calm as ever. "It's already clean." Her voice was quiet, even, but the words carried a calm defiance, one that refused to bend under the weight of humiliation. A few investors exchanged looks. They had expected her to shrink. Instead, she had stood, without raising her tone, without breaking her composure. The quiet power unsettled them, more than open rebellion would have. Victoria scoffed, waving her hand as though brushing away dust. "Then stand there and keep quiet." Elena did, but her silence was deliberate. She knew silence could be the loudest noise in the room. Daniel cleared his throat. "Before we move forward, I need reassurance. Not from glossy charts, from substance." He let the words hang, his eyes still flicking toward Elena. The executive stiffened. A current of unease pulsed through the room. Victoria's laugh was tight, forced. "You'll get reassurance from me, Daniel. That's all you need." But even as she spoke, the room betrayed her. People shifted uncomfortably, doubt spreading like wildfire. Elena lowered her gaze, gripping the handle of her cart. She thought of Lucas, of his small hand clutching hers at the hospital, of the fever that had spiked again only hours earlier. She couldn't afford to gamble with his future. If this collapse meant she could reclaim even a fraction of the life she'd lost, she had to seize it. Her chest tightened, but her resolve crystallized. She would reveal herself, but on her terms, not Victoria's. She stepped closer to the long glass table, just enough for her reflection to join the glowing charts on the wall. Not a janitor's reflection, but a strategist's silhouette, bleeding into the company's false numbers. Daniel's eyes widened, reading the unspoken message. She was here, and she was ready. Elena let the silence stretch before she finally said, calm and even, "Sometimes cleaning isn't just about surfaces. It's about removing what's rotting underneath." The words dropped into the air like stones in still water, sending ripples across the room. Executives stilled, investors stared, and Victoria's face blanched with fury. That was it. The first direct step into the open. No title, no claim, just a truth sharp enough to pierce the illusion. And this was the moment to lock the audience in. If you've been waiting for a story where the underdog finally stops bowing and starts fighting back, Elena's narration threaded through, now is the time to hit subscribe. The next move is coming, and it'll hit harder than you expect. The storm had begun, and Elena Torres wasn't going to fade back into the shadows. The room didn't breathe. Elena's words, calm, almost casual, hung like smoke, refusing to dissipate. Removing what's rotting underneath. A janitor's phrase, yes, but layered with meaning sharp enough for everyone to taste the edge. Victoria Lang's eyes flared. She forced a brittle laugh. See? Even the janitor knows her role, cleaning up. She turned back to the investors, desperate to redirect. Now, let's return to the matter of contracts. But the shift was irreversible. Elena could feel it in the air, the way the investors leaned back. No longer lulled, the way Daniel's focus sharpened. The fortress had cracks, and she had just widened one without raising her voice. She rolled her cart toward the far corner, her movements unhurried. Silence was still her weapon. The Mont Blanc in her pocket felt heavier, waiting for the moment to strike. Daniel steepled his fingers. Before we move forward, I'd like to address risk once more. In my experience, the greatest danger is ignoring the voices that see what others refuse to. Executives stiffened. Some glanced at Elena. The whispers had already spread, and now Daniel was feeding them. Victoria's lips tightened. Daniel, this isn't a classroom. You don't need lessons. You need assurance. His reply was even, but barbed. Sometimes lessons are the only assurance worth trusting. Elena pressed her mop against the floor, grounding herself in the motion. She thought of Lucas, his flushed cheeks, the way his small voice had whispered, "Don't give up, Mom." Every humiliation she endured had been for him. And now she could see a path. A dangerous one, yes, but one that could lead to security she hadn't dared to dream of. Victoria launched into another monologue about growth projections, her hands slicing through the air, her voice louder than necessary. It was theater, not strategy, and everyone knew it. Elena's reflection stretched across the glass wall, her uniform stark against the glow of the city skyline. She thought of the years she had spent here, her name etched into strategies that now carried someone else's signature. She had been erased, but the work was still hers. And today, erasure was no longer possible. She reached for her cart, slipping the Mont Blanc into her hand. She didn't hold it up, just let it rest between her fingers, visible enough when she moved to adjust her mop. Daniel's eyes caught it instantly. His brows lifted, recognition sparking like a lit fuse. "Interesting," he said, leaning forward. "That pen looks familiar. I could swear I saw it once in the hands of the person who taught me everything I know about risk management." The words detonated. Every head turned toward Elena. Silence collapsed into a ripple of whispers. Victoria's face hardened. "That's absurd. She's a janitor." But the certainty was gone from her voice. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe once, but I don't forget my mentors, especially not the one who saved my career more than a decade ago." Elena's chest tightened. This was the edge of the cliff. She hadn't chosen to step here, but Daniel had pulled her forward. The reveal was now inevitable. Victoria slammed her hand against the table. "Enough. You're undermining this meeting with baseless distractions. We have investors waiting, millions at stake." Her words faltered when one of the junior executives, the same woman who had spoken to Elena in the hallway, spoke up hesitantly. I remember her too. Torres. She trained me when I first joined. She built the model Lang uses to this day." The room erupted into murmurs. Investors leaned forward, whispering to one another, their pens scratching notes. Elena didn't move. She stood with the pen in her hand, calm, unflinching, her silence louder than shouting. Victoria's face flushed, panic bleeding into rage. "This is slander. She's a janitor. That's all she's ever been." Elena finally lifted her chin, her gaze steady. She didn't speak. Not yet. Timing was still everything. But the damage was already done. The investors had heard the whispers, seen Daniel's recognition, listened to the junior executive's admission. The facade was collapsing from within. Victoria's voice cracked as she tried to continue. "We'll proceed to signing." "No," Daniel interrupted. The single word landed like a gavel. "Not until we address what's rotting underneath." Elena's phrase, repeated in his authoritative voice, sealed it. The boardroom fell into complete silence. All eyes turned to her. The woman with the mop was no longer invisible, and she knew the next move would be hers. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. The hum of the projector, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, every sound magnified in the vacuum left after Daniel's words. "Not until we address what's rotting underneath." His voice had echoed hers, binding them together in front of everyone. Elena's hand tightened around the Mont Blanc pen, its weight heavy with the history. The moment had arrived, sooner than she'd planned. She could step back, let the rumor fade, let Victoria's dominance reassert itself. Or she could step forward and let the truth finally breathe. Victoria Lang leaned across the table, her eyes burning. "This is absurd," she snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. "We are not here to indulge fantasies about janitors pretending to be strategists. We are here to secure contracts. That's what matters." But the investors weren't nodding anymore. They weren't scribbling notes in eager compliance. They were waiting for Elena. Daniel didn't look away from her. "Elena Torres," he said softly, almost reverently. "I thought you were gone." The name landed like a thunderclap. Executives froze. Investors leaned forward. Even the assistants at the back of the room stopped moving, their tablets forgotten in their hands. Victoria scoffed, too quickly. "That's impossible. Torres left years ago." Her words faltered, her hand trembling as she adjusted her scarf. Elena finally raised her head, meeting Daniel's eyes, then sweeping her gaze slowly across the room. Calm, controlled. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I made a choice. My son needed me. And when life gives you that kind of choice, you don't hesitate." Her voice was even, but her chest tightened at the mention of Lucas. For a moment, the janitor uniform and the strategist title blended into one undeniable truth. She was both. The junior executive at the far end of the table spoke hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you. She trained me. She built the frameworks we still use." The murmurs grew louder now, investors shifting in their seats. Recognition spread like wildfire. Victoria slammed her hand against the table. "Enough! This is a distraction. She's nothing more than a disgruntled former employee who couldn't keep up." Elena's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Funny, I seem to recall you begging me to join your team years ago. You needed someone to cover the blind spots you couldn't see." She tapped the Mont Blanc lightly against her palm, each click punctuating the silence. "And now, those blind spots are swallowing your company whole." Gasps rippled across the table. The investors straightened, their eyes darting between the two women. Daniel leaned forward, his expression grim but certain. "She's right. I've seen the projections. The cracks are real. And if Torres is who I know she is, I trust her judgment over any polished pitch." The balance shifted fully. Victoria's carefully crafted illusion cracked open, the weight of truth pressing down on her. "You think you can humiliate me?" she hissed at Elena, her composure unraveling. "You think parading your past makes you powerful? You're nothing but a janitor now." Elena stepped forward, her cart forgotten at the wall, her presence filling the space with quiet authority. "No," she said. "I'm a mother. I'm a strategist. I'm the woman who built the very foundation you're standing on. And I'm not here to humiliate you, Victoria. I'm here to stop you from destroying what's left." Her words were steady, but inside, her pulse hammered with equal parts fear and relief. The reveal was complete. No turning back. The investors erupted in questions, their voices overlapping. "Is this true? Did she really? What else are you hiding?" Victoria tried to shout over them, her voice shrill. "Lies! She's lying. Don't listen to her." But her desperation betrayed her. The more she denied, the more the room leaned toward Elena. Daniel stood, commanding silence. "I came here to invest in stability. What I've seen is arrogance covering weakness. But what I also see is the strategist who once saved my company when no one else could." He turned to Elena, his voice firm. "If you're willing, I'd rather hear from you." The air shifted. Authority moved, subtle but undeniable, from Victoria's manicured hands to Elena's calm grip on a battered pen. Elena inhaled, steadying herself. "If you want stability, you need transparency. The cracks are there, and if you ignore them, they will widen until nothing remains. But if you face them head-on, rebuild with honesty, this company could still stand." The room stilled again. But this time, it wasn't because of fear. It was because the underdog had taken the floor. Victoria's face twisted, her mask of power shattered. "You'll regret this," she spat. Elena met her gaze evenly. "No, the only regret here will be yours, for underestimating the wrong woman." The storm had broken, and everyone in the room had witnessed the shift. The boardroom buzzed with restless energy, the glass walls trembling with the weight of whispered speculation. Investors leaned forward, their pens hovering above contracts now forgotten. Assistants exchanged nervous glances, while executives sank lower in their chairs, unwilling to align themselves with Victoria Lang as her mask slipped. Elena stood at the head of the table now, the mop abandoned in the corner, the Mont Blanc pen steady in her hand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence that followed her last words carried more weight than any outburst could. Victoria broke first. "This is a stunt!" she shrieked, her composure gone, her scarf twisted awkwardly around her neck, as though even her clothes were choking. "She's lying, all of it. She's bitter. She's nothing." But no one laughed with her. No one backed her up. The brittle laughter she'd relied on before was gone, replaced by a chorus of doubt that grew louder with every second. Daniel Reed's voice cut through the chaos. "I remember her." Elena Torres was no janitor in the rooms I sat in. She was the mind who tore holes through my competitors' strategies and rebuilt my company's foundation from the ground up. If you call her nothing, Victoria, then you're admitting this company was built on nothing. Gasps rippled across the table. Even the junior executives, once silent, nodded faintly, whispers confirming what they already knew. Elena had been the strategist behind the curtain, the ghost who had shaped the empire before Victoria painted her name across it. Elena let them speak. She watched the tide turn, felt the momentum shifting, not through her own push, but through the cracks widening under Victoria's feet. And when she finally stepped forward, her voice was calm, quiet, undeniable. "You don't have to believe me," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "You already know the truth. You've felt the instability. You've seen the cracks in the numbers. I'm not here to claim a crown. I'm here to remind you that ignoring reality is the fastest way to lose everything." Her words landed like stones on water, ripples expanding until no one could deny the disturbance. Victoria lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "Don't you dare stand there and—" "Victoria!" Daniel interrupted sharply, his tone final. "Enough! This isn't your stage anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. For the first time in years, she was powerless in her own boardroom. One of the investors cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Miss Torres, if what you say is true, then this company is headed for collapse without intervention. Would you be willing to provide a candid assessment?" Victoria slammed her hand against the table. "You can't be serious. She's a janitor. Look at her." But the investors weren't looking at the mop or the uniform anymore. They were looking at the pen in her hand, the steadiness in her eyes, the composure that only true authority carried. Elena drew a slow breath. "Yes, I'll provide an assessment. Not for power, not for titles, but because people's jobs, their lives, depend on this company's survival. And because my son deserves a world where truth matters more than arrogance." The mention of Lucas softened the room instantly. Investors shifted, executives lowered their eyes, and even the assistants at the back glanced at her with a flicker of respect. Her motivation wasn't greed. It was survival, family, dignity. Daniel nodded once, firmly. "Then I'll back her." The boardroom erupted again. voices clashing, some siding with him, others clinging to Victoria's shrinking shadow. But in the noise, Elena's voice cut through like a blade. "Victoria built a fortress of glass," she said. "It looks strong until the first stone hits. And today, that stone has already been thrown." The executives froze. Investors leaned closer. The weight of her metaphor hit home, clear, vivid, undeniable. Victoria's chair screeched as she shoved it back, her face contorted with rage. "You'll pay for this, Torres. You and your sick son. You'll regret crossing me." The words, venomous and cruel, landed in the worst possible way. A collective gasp swept through the room. Even hardened investors recoiled. A mother's fight for her child was sacred, and Victoria had spat on it. Daniel's voice was cold, furious. "That's enough. You've revealed more about yourself in one sentence than any audit could. You're unfit to lead." Elena's hand trembled slightly around the pen, but her gaze didn't falter. "You've humiliated me for the last time, Victoria. And now, you've humiliated yourself in front of everyone who mattered." The boardroom fell into stunned silence. No one defended Victoria. No one reached for her hand. For the first time, she stood alone. And for the first time, Elena Torres stood fully revealed, not as a janitor, but as the strategist who had always been the sharpest mind in the room. The silence in the boardroom stretched into something heavier than glass, pressing on every chest. Victoria Lang stood frozen, her hand still trembling from the outburst she wished she could take back. Her words about Elena's son hung in the air like poison, impossible to erase. Elena remained steady, her Montblanc pen resting in her palm, her eyes locked on the woman who had tried to grind her dignity into dust. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The damage was done, and the witnesses had seen everything. Daniel Reed straightened his suit jacket and turned toward the investors. "You heard it yourselves. This is not leadership. This is arrogance weaponized against truth." His voice was iron, each word slamming into the polished table like nails into a coffin. "And I won't invest in arrogance." One by one, the investors followed suit. Contracts that had been prepared so carefully, poised for signatures, were closed. Pens set down, folders snapped shut. The sound of retreat was louder than any gavel. Victoria's face blanched. "No, wait, you don't understand." But no one was listening anymore. Executives shifted their chairs away from her, as though distance could wash the stench of her downfall from their reputations. Assistants avoided her eyes. The fortress she had built, brick by brick, on illusions and borrowed strategies, collapsed in real time. Elena finally stepped closer, calm and unshaken. She placed her pen on the table with deliberate precision, the same way she once closed deals worth millions. Her voice carried the weight of both strategist and mother. "You thought you could humiliate me into silence," she said, each word sharp as glass. "But you humiliated yourself instead. Power doesn't come from titles or corner offices. It comes from truth, and you abandoned it a long time ago." Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. Her power had evaporated. Daniel faced Elena fully. "This company doesn't need illusions. It needs a strategist who can see beyond the surface." His tone softened, respect clear. "If you're willing, I trust you to lead the restructuring. Not for titles, but for stability." Gasps rippled through the room. Executives sat up straighter. Even the assistants leaned forward. The proposition was more than a lifeline. It was vindication. Elena thought of Lucas, his fevered cheeks, his fragile smile when she promised him that better days were coming. She didn't need wealth. She didn't crave titles, but stability, healthcare, dignity, these were priceless. She nodded once, her decision firm. I'll do it. Not for power, for the people who depend on this company, for the families who can't afford for leaders to play games with their futures. The room exhaled as though it had been holding its breath. The shift was undeniable. Authority, once draped across Victoria Lang's shoulders, now wrapped itself around Elena Torres, quiet but immovable. Victoria staggered back, her voice breaking into a desperate cry. You can't take this from me. This is mine. Daniel's reply was merciless. It was never yours. You were living in her shadow the entire time. The finality of his words ended it. Victoria's collapse wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, her silence louder than any tantrum she could have thrown. Elena retrieved her pen, slipping it back into her pocket. It no longer felt like a relic of a lost life. It felt like a bridge to the one she was rebuilding. She turned toward the investors and executives. We begin again. With honesty, with clarity, with respect. Heads nodded. Voices murmured agreement. A new current flowed through the boardroom, one she had shaped not by shouting, but by standing firm. Later, as she pushed her cart out of the room, she passed the reflection of herself in the glass wall. Uniform wrinkled, mop still in the bucket, pen tucked in her pocket. She was both janitor and strategist, mother and leader. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to hide either part. The fight wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every invisible worker whose worth had been buried under arrogance. She smiled faintly. Lucas, we're going to be okay. And to the silent audience watching her story unfold, her voice reached out. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?